Hey, everybody. The privilege today of having a nice chat with Michael Matthews from Bearcat and Alinea Coffee down here in New Orleans. And we just enjoyed a phenomenal lunch. So can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Michael Matthews. I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana, and I have a coffee company called Alinea Coffee Roasters. I also have a restaurant called Bearcat CBD that I'm the co-owner of, and we just opened a bakery down the street called Bearcat Baked. So in between roasting coffee, I'm running around like a crazy person, running a brunch restaurant and a new bakery. So
very cool. Yeah. So what's your story? Tell us more about how Alinea started. How'd you get into roasting coffee? You had the restaurant first, right? Or no?
No, I had the coffee.
Oh,
coffee
great.
came first, but I did not have a coffee background. I was actually a touring musician for almost 10 years. So I got into coffee, traveling around a bunch, and I was always trying to go get espresso in between the load in and the sound check. So it was always later in the day. I had one of my favorite drummers at the time, this guy Stan Bicknell. He is from New Zealand, and he has a coffee roasting company called Rumble Coffee Roasters. So he was always posting drumming videos in front of his roaster. And I was like, this is cool. This guy, like, he likes drums and coffee. I like drums and coffee. And then while I had all this time on the road touring around, sitting in a van for 8 hours a day, I was like, well, let me start researching coffee roasting. And I think everyone's kind of aha coffee moment with specialty coffee is with some kind of natural Ethiopian coffee. That seems like most of the people I've talked to, they're like, oh, natural Ethiopian coffee kind of changed things for me. I remember I went into the shop in South Carolina. The guy was like, oh, I just emptied out all the espresso grinders. I have this natural Ethiopia wild coffee. And he pulled me like an EK shot, just single dose shot. And I was walking out the door and I turned and I was like, what did you put in this? I've never had anything like this. And he pointed to this giant flavor wheel on the wall. He's like, oh, this is, specialty coffee, and this is a natural Ethiopian coffee. Here's the story on it. I just kind of walked out of there kind of confused and intrigued. And I was like, I think I want to get a little coffee roaster to roast coffee to bring out on the road with me. I reached out to the people at Crop the Cup, and I got an ARC 800 roaster. I was like, I don't want to kind of do it. I want like a little mini production roaster, all the bells and whistles. I want data logging. I like data because I come from a science background. I was a biology major in college and stuff. And I like sifting through data, finding trends, making changes, all that stuff, and seeing what the outcome is. So I was like, oh, this is perfect. And I burned so much coffee. Yeah. It's one of those things you can't just can't watch a YouTube video and be like, yeah, you have to, I always tell people the same with like cooking or with anything, you got to mess up a lot of things before you start figuring out. You're like, all right, this is really bad. And then this is really good.
Right.
And then you start trying to fuse the gap. And then some of my neighbors were like, are you roasting coffee? Like, I can smell coffee over the I was like, I hope this isn't a complaint, And they're like, no, it smells great. So I was like, well, I'm glad it at least smells good. It doesn't necessarily taste good. And what really pulled me into the coffee roasting side of things was I felt like very isolated learning how to roast. So I started reaching out to other people, and they just kind of took me right under, coming from a very the music industry is so competitive and a little cutthroat at times, and people are like, oh, I'm not giving you the in, or I don't, they're fighting for the same gig you're fighting for.
Completely different.
And this was so different. I was like, oh, well, everyone's just so engaging and being like, oh, there's not a lot of other people roasting coffee. I'm happy to answer your questions. And there's a guy here in town, and I was like, longtime coffee professional. And I was like, I want to learn how to taste coffee. He's like, don't ever drink the same coffee twice. And I started ordering coffee, getting 1 pound bags from Sweet Maria's. And I'm like, all right, I want to roast everything and taste everything and kind of make these mental notes of all right, this is this flavor. This is blueberry. This is raspberry in coffee. And it kind of just became an obsession. And I was just enjoying it. And to me, there's no shortage of knowledge or learning in coffee. I'm never going to get bored. And to this day, I'm 8 years in, and I've never been bored. I've always been all right, there's something else, there's something new, there's a new brewing process, or how does this change in the roast affect these different brewing outcomes? And then I kind of went down the whole brewing wormhole of getting every brewer, every shaped pour over device. And you find these weird black holes that you're trying to connect all these dots. And then my business partner, longtime friend, came over to my house and he just sees all this coffee stuff and the espresso machine. I was roasting coffee and I had this little, I had an espresso brewer that you could plug into the cigarette lighter on our bus. And you could, I'd roast the coffee, put it in these little pods, and I was brewing. People were like, why don't you just buy the pods? I'm like, no, like I roasted this coffee, and then so going back, my friend came over and he's like, what are you doing with all this coffee stuff? And he had just opened the first Bearcat Uptown. I was like, I don't really know, and this is when I was transitioning, trying to get off the road touring. I was on the road 230 days out of the year.
I get that.
I know you understand this. You drive all over, but I was, I would get home for 3 days after being gone for 8 weeks. I would do my laundry and go right back into the suitcase, and you're just constantly moving. So I was like, maybe I can make this jump to be home and maybe kind of get into coffee, because then it turned into kind of a hobby. I was roasting for family and friends, holidays, grandparents were like, let me get some of your coffee. And do you have any coffee with chicory, which is a big thing down here in New Orleans? So I'm like, I don't have coffee and chicory, but I'm like figuring it out and everything. And so my friend was like, well, I'm going to bring you in over at Bearcat. At the time, there wasn't quite a spot for me. So he's like, oh, it's going to be maybe a month or two. I originally tried to go work at a coffee roastery, and I applied for a production assistant position. And I get there for the interview and I'm like, I want to work in the roastery. And they're like, actually, we didn't take that ad down, so we already hired somebody. But I had just gone out with some of the Bearcat baristas to LA, and I did a barista certification. I was like, oh, I can dial espresso in, like no problem. Like I feel comfortable doing that. And they're like, well, what do you know about steaming milk? I was like, I can't do that. So he's like, you have 3 weeks before we go to LA. Like you need to learn how to steam milk. So I had my little espresso machine at home, and I went to the local grocery store probably like 5 or 6 days each week. And I was buying like 3 or 4 gallons of milk. And after the first week, this lady at the register, she's like, what are you doing with all this damn milk? And I was like, practicing. She's like, are you drinking all this milk? I was like, no, I'm like learning how to steam milk and pouring it. I was practicing with instant coffee, just like, because you don't have to pull a shot every time. No, I'm kind of like showing her my really bad pictures. And it's funny, I go back through my photos now looking for other pictures, and I can see the whole progress of like really bad latte art to like a swan, and right. It's like the whole trajectory over years of like photo albums on my iPhone. I always think about her, because I still see her to this day, and she's like, what's up, coffee man? What's up, coffee man? Every time I go to the grocery, she's still there, years later. So I had a barista certification. I could dial in espresso. I could roast coffee, but I had no bar experience. So when I went to go apply for this roasting job, they're like, do you want to be a barista instead? And I was like, I guess. They're like, well, do you have any barista experience? I was like, I don't. But they're like, they couldn't make sense of me having all this other background, but no, not coming up through as a barista, which I think most people will talk to me and be like, oh, what? So you're a barista and you just moved into the roastery? I was like, it wasn't. It was completely opposite. It was kind of very random. And I do think it was like truly meant to be. It just took more of a natural course than like this forced thing. I've enjoyed every second of it. And so the pandemic is really where it went from a hobby going into a business to a full-on business, because I offered free delivery within the whole New Orleans area during the entire pandemic. We just opened this location 3 months before, immediately shut it down, and we moved all of our operations to the Uptown Bearcat, and we were just doing takeout, and we're doing everything with a skeleton crew. And it was just like a lot of long hours, a lot of days in a row. And I remember my phone would just be going off with online orders. And I'm like, I'm gonna have to go sit in the garage. And I wasn't roasting on a big roaster. I'm roasting on a 800 gram roaster. So I could maybe do 2 bags of coffee max. And like, I'd have 30 or 40 bags. And I'm saying, oh, it's gonna be next day to 2 day delivery. So I'm like, I'm about to go be in my garage for 10 hours tonight, sweating. Yeah. And I had one coffee, and it was a Wash Costa Rica coffee, and I had 500 pounds of it. That was the best learning experience for me, because I was roasting so many small batches of the same coffee that like I knew every way it could taste, every end temperature. That's where things clicked for me, because I'm like, oh, I've been trying to roast all these different coffees, different processes and small batches, but the most progression I made as a roaster was roasting the same coffee over and over and over and over, and really learning how to manipulate the roaster and say, oh, I got sidetracked bagging coffee while I was roasting. I forgot to make this airflow change here. I made it 10 or 20 degrees later.
So you're looking for
curves,
the similarities in that.
Yeah. And so I would taste those side by side, and that made me, I started cupping all these batches, and sometimes you'd have 12 different batches that you're cupping of the same coffee, very slight differences. And doing that over and over, those small, minute differences became more apparent on my palate. I started making that mental connection between like taste and the roast curves, and the outcome of that. Once I was at a place where I was like, okay, I'm kind of comfortable, I would cup my coffees against other roasters' coffees, or I would talk to some importers and be like, who else bought this Washington Nicaraguan coffee, this lot? And they'd be like, oh, this person in New York, this person in California and Florida. And I would order the same coffee and compare it to the same coffee I had, how I roasted it. And then you can start seeing they're very similar, but they're all very different.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like the competition today too, right?
It is. And I think the beauty of it is it's like, okay, there is no perfect way to necessarily roast this coffee, or the best way that I think this coffee should be roasted is not the best way that other people think it should be roasted. And ultimately you get to leave your thumbprint on this coffee. It's like, okay, here's what is going on with this coffee. This is my version of it that I think tastes the best.
I think it's awesome. I think it's interesting how coffee roasters, especially, you brought up a couple of things that stick out to me, is how collaborative this industry is.
100%.
I mean, people jump to the opportunity to help another roaster out. There's no hesitation. They just
zero.
There's zero hesitation. And I watch this with you guys in these competitions, and I'm always humbled by it, because we're looking at the best roasters the U.S. has to offer, that compete. Because there's a bunch of guys we don't know who they are, right? Because they're just too busy in their craft. But you guys compete, and you guys are always sharing notes, lessons, things that you've come across, and it's humbling, because this industry to me is just a real industry where people just want to help one another and be together, and it's really cool to watch. So when you're talking about your palate, I was interested because you have a lot to do with the recipes here at Bearcat too, right? So there's a lot of food.
We have a ton of food. We try to do as much in-house as we can. So we bake our own bread. We make all of our own pancake mixes, rather than like settling for the way something tastes based on what is available for you to buy. You can ultimately make it exactly how you want it. And it also adds a nice element to your own story. It's like, okay, anybody can go out and buy this pancake mix, or this seafood from this seafood rep that everyone else uses in town. But it's like we work with a Vietnamese fishing family, and like we get all of our soft shell crabs and crab meat, and we do the legwork to make sure that we have the best ingredients, even if it's hyper seasonal and we can only get it for a short window of time. We do a lot of the legwork up front to have a story to tell. We make all of our own bottled drinks with fresh fruit juices and from loose leaf teas, and I think that speaks for itself of why people kind of seek us out. It helps you stand out.
So did your coffee experience developing your palate there, was that the cart before the horse, or the horse before meaning how it went into food? I guess I don't know if they're that similar, but
well, I think the goal with Bearcat is always to have this elevated food program along with a coffee program and a cocktail or alcoholic beverage program all on one level, because oftentimes there's a really good restaurant in town, you go and the food's great but the coffee's not great, right? It's just like it's an afterthought, or it's a great bar or coffee shop, but it's this very like forced food menu. They're like, oh, we just need food, like we're just gonna copy everything,
right? No, because you guys put a lot of effort into both, because you want it's a joint presentation.
We've always wanted people to. That's why when the kitchen's cranking food out and stuff, it's like, okay, if everyone's most likely in the morning going to get some kind of coffee beverage or something, and a lot of stuff just might come in at once, you really got to crank these drinks out. You don't want somebody getting this fried chicken biscuit with gravy and stuff, and then the hot chai latte is like coming out minutes later. It's like you want them to have this beverage experience. It's like a story unfolding. Right. They come in, they see plants, the aesthetic's nice. We want it to be comfortable. They're greeted by the server. Then they have this coffee or cocktail experience, and then the food comes, and then maybe they get a dessert, and then they leave. And you want this whole thing to kind of unfold for them. My business partner, family member had celiac growing up, and New Orleans is a very hard city to be gluten-free in. At least back then, everything's run by old school Italians.
Right.
You call them up and you're like, oh, what can I do that's gluten-free? And they're like, just don't come here. And they hang up. And
that's awesome.
I think now that we have the data and the science to pinpoint allergies and stuff, you bring your vegan friend to a barbecue restaurant, they can't even eat the salad because the dressing probably has pork fat in it or something. And eating is such a communal thing. Nobody ever wants to feel left out. And everybody should be able to come to a place where they can eat off the same menu. And I think it's up to us as restaurant owners and stuff to do the legwork up front, to know what kind of oil things are fried in, and to know how to deal with all these different allergies and have these fully well thought out dishes that are gluten-free.
Well, your coffee, your menu, the coffee on your menu was very similar to that because it was just so different that, from drink to drink to drink, there's some stuff that, people want, they come in and they can get a drip, but I enjoyed it. The coffee I got really bright. I'm just getting this whole feeling because I'm getting a grasp of who you are, Mike. To me, is all this preparation goes in. Everything you did in coffee was absolutely necessary, and you learned from all of it, all the way up, right? Yeah. And to see that work into food, because all you guys have not completely different backgrounds, but you just
different all get life.
You get here, and you were in just in the U.S. roasting competition and came in third place in the country, which is awesome. Congratulations!
Thank you.
I think that's phenomenal. As long as I've been involved in this industry, you're probably against the toughest field I've ever seen. It was incredible.
I remember I had never heard of too many people competing out of New Orleans. So it was like, I didn't know what I was getting into by competing, and I'm going to sign up for the prelims. So I remember signing up for it. And I think all last year for me was figuring out the process and the systems and like what the judges are looking for and how to navigate the rules and everything. And then this year I came in with more of a game plan and just kind of being a little bit more comfortable knowing, and it was more pressure, but less pressure in a way. Like I knew what I needed to do to like try to progress. And I remember it's like, okay, cool. This year's prelims, I tied for third and got bumped out at the tiebreaker. I was like, it was so close to having a guaranteed spot into the qualifier. So I was like, I'm going to do whatever I can to get into the qualifier. I remember sitting on the computer, just refreshing. And I got in the qualifier. So I'm like, all right, cool. It's going to be great. That's when they announced that they're only doing one qualifier. And then everybody was essentially, it was going to be a bigger version of the finals.
Right.
And
that field was intense.
I remember seeing the email going out, and it's got everyone CC'd on it of who was going to be there. And I clicked the drop down menu, and I was like, oh my God.
It's the best.
This is some of my favorite roasters that I bought coffee from years back when I was trying to just learn. And I'm like, damn, this is going to be a dogfight. And it was. It was a dogfight. And then with all the freeze and stuff, and having the first day where the heat wasn't on, and it was 10 degrees colder than outside. It was like just about freezing in the convention center. I remember after the green grading, I was just holding the green coffee trying to warm up before I roasted it. I was holding it like a baby. I was just like, it was freezing. The beans were freezing cold because they had been in the little convention area for, a couple days, watching that whole week unfold. And I always have to catch a flight back, and if the results get pushed back, I'm like, I got to be at work in the morning. It's hard for me to get away from the restaurant and everything. So I was walking down the little walkway to get onto my plane, and I'm like, I'm going to be on the plane and I'm not going to have Wi-Fi. I'm not even going to know the results. I'm like stressed out. And then everyone starts texting me like, they're like, oh, you got fifth. And I'm like, just insane for me. And, I think everybody deserves to move on, or, it doesn't matter if you got first or dead last. Everyone chipped in to help each other. And I think
that's the amazing thing.
Especially, I remember last year being in Portland at the finals, and we were in the cupping area. I'm cupping, and I didn't have a coach. I was just doing it by myself. And three of the other competitors came over like, hey, can I taste your coffee? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, this is, like they were so honest and open about how the coffee tastes. And they're like, oh, don't make this flavor call. Make this flavor call. You want to assume that it's like some kind of sabotage or like, okay,
But
this
it's
is
not.
the guy that
Yeah.
I'm going up against. You get the score sheets back and you're like, oh, they were right. Like they help. And everyone's just kind of like, oh, we're all in this together. And there's people that I think through all the competitions, I've maybe spent the total time with of 2 or 3 hours in close proximity. And I couldn't imagine not knowing these people.
So when you roast, we've got a lot of technical stuff that's come across, I mean, for roasters with Cropster and things like that. Are you sensory too? I mean, to a extent, you're looking at your coffee and
I'm
smelling
always
it?
looking at the coffee and smelling it and taking color readings. I think that has helped me tremendously.
Yeah.
And just going into the roast with getting as much data on the green coffee as you can. And as the moisture content changes, as the coffee ages and stuff like that. I've also had times where the computer dies. Maybe I'm like, oh, I'll get away with it without having the charger, or you forget the charger, and then you strictly have to roast on sight and sound.
Yeah.
And they have on my arc roaster, they have a little timer. I always set that timer because the roaster, as long as the roaster's on, you have a timer. The computer dies, you don't know how long the roast has been. At least you have something, it's a backup. But there's been plenty of times where I'm like, you start panicking, but then you start thinking back. There's times where I will force myself, if I have some extra coffee, it's not big enough for a full batch, I'll roast it without a computer. And I think that's something that not a lot of people do. It's very comfortable. I will admit it's extremely comfortable to have a computer seeing everything that's telling you, okay, this is your rate of rise. Oh, I'm going a little too fast or a little too slow. I need to make some adjustment. That's always like, something to fall back on, but you have to put yourself in uncomfortable situations, whether you're competing or, you're roasting new coffees or trying new things.
Well,
and it's
the reason that I even asked that question is because of your culinary skills too, right? So that you've got to be watching what's going on when you're cooking, right?
Yeah.
You're not looking at curves.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But you don't have a tryer either. You can't pull out a scallop and go, oh, that's perfect. But
we always, we try to taste everything we can every day. And even between two different locations with the same recipes, there's slight variations in flavor. And you're trying to keep this train on the tracks.
I think that's great advice for people though, too.
It's going to breathe a little bit. Things are never going to go. What I've learned in the restaurant industry, every day is, you can wake up and be like, it's going to be a perfect day. It's never going to be a perfect day. Yeah. And you have to go in with that mentality of like, I know it's not going to be perfect, but how do I keep everyone calm? How do I keep it, in motion, keep people coming in, and being a leader. And you have to taste everything. You have to know what's going into everything. And you have to know if something's bad, it's like, okay, we're not going to serve this. We're going to fix it. And you fix it right away. Right. Rather than let it go on. And your customers are going to realize that. They're going to be the first one to be like, oh, something's off or something like this. And most of the time they're right. If they get the same thing every day, that's your most honest.
That's your most honest judge.
Honest judge.
How has working in coffee, having coffee roastery impacted your community?
The coffee scene in New Orleans, I'd say, is a few years behind in terms of specialty compared to some of the other bigger cities. I've met so many people who've been all operating, doing the same thing in their own little bubbles around the city. And there's a couple roasters that we all roast in the same kind of shared roasting space over at Hay Cafe in Mid-City at their roastery. We're always kind of coming and going, and one person's coming in, one person's leaving. We're leaving coffee for each other, and it's just kind of this open-ended classroom kind of like people are like, oh, like, I popped in a little bit early to roast, and you kind of hang out with them while they roast, and you're kind of seeing people how they roast on the same roaster, and you're like, oh, I didn't think to do that. And then maybe you try it and it works for some coffees, but not some other coffees. But everyone's just kind of coming together and sharing information and just trying to get better. But
so the coffee community here in New Orleans, there's some really good roasters down here.
There's some great roasters, and it's not like Portland, Oregon, where there's a roastery on every corner or everything, and it's a much smaller niche community. And we do, this is one of the biggest ports for commodity coffee. And like the ports here, 95% of the stuff that comes through is all commodity coffee. We have Folgers Coffee, Community Coffee, PJ's Coffee, and some big staple names who have been doing it for decades. And New Orleans has such a deep-rooted history in coffee as a port and as coffee roasting.
And they made chicory famous.
Yeah. And that's a huge thing that a lot of people come down here and they want coffee with chicory. And I think you see some people getting kind of creative with the chicory, making like, their own chicory syrup or
kind of fun.
Yeah, it's fun. And I have a friend that just opened a brewery here, and there's a lot of cross collaborations. I like seeing people in the coffee and the wine and the beer world all kind of crisscross. And a good buddy I went to high school with just opened up a brewery, and he's like, I want to do a coffee chicory stout. And I was like, I've never messed with chicory, so I ordered 20 pounds of chicory. And
let's go. Yeah.
We cup chicory from 100% chicory all the way up to 100% coffee and every ratio in between. And he learned a lot out of it. I learned a lot out of it, but
the cultures are very similar.
Very similar. Yeah. And, but it brings a lot of people who would never have come together to create something or to,
Exactly.
For me, especially people are like, when I go to these competitions, they're like, oh, like, who do you cup with for your flavor calls for these competitions and stuff? And I'm like, my bartenders. And they're like, you don't have like a QC team? I'm like, Alinea is just me. Like, I do everything: sourcing, roasting, packing, brewing. I go do sales, I go do deliveries. And I've learned more about cupping coffee from some of my bar managers who have insanely great palates for wine, bitters, all these liqueurs.
Smart.
We'll cup right here on this table and we'll go through stuff. And I think as a newer roaster getting in the specialty, you're like, no, dark roast. You're like running away from like bitterness. But and I'm like, oh, it's bitter. And he's like, well, this is a good bitter. And I'm like, what do you mean it's a good bitter? He's like, let's go. And he's grabbing bottles. He's like, we're going to taste all the different variations of bitterness and what's good and what's bad.
So their palates are trained to something else.
And I'm like, but I think sometimes cupping with other coffee people can sometimes be one-dimensional because you can play it safe.
I think you're right, because you'll hear somebody, because I've done a couple guilds and things like that, and everybody's cupping and go, well, I really taste the caramel in that. Well, nobody can get that out of their mind now, because now there's a caramel in that.
Yeah.
Because it was suggested. Right. So I get that. And then when you get somebody that doesn't even know that, right, they're coming in with
they don't know what the coffee flavor wheel is like, or the comfort zones, and they're like,
I think that's really awesome. Now, you talked about the Ethiopian natural was the one that just kind of like opened, boom, there's something here, right, beyond me. But the next question would be, what's your favorite coffee that you roast? Do you have one?
Currently or like overall?
Probably both. I mean,
overall, I really like Ethiopian Harar varieties. More of, some people say, oh, you're old school. I'm like, I don't know that. They're like, oh, it's just like an old school variety. They have all these new heirloom varieties that people are roasting now. Natural Ethiopian coffee is I love, and I think sometimes it can be a little bit one-dimensional. It's like, okay, this is a blueberry or this is strawberry. But I like that I've seen other people taste coffee. I'm like, this is going to taste like blueberry pie. And it's the average, it's very clear to them that that's what that is. It's not like, I taste coffee. I still struggle with making flavor calls in some coffees and like deciding what to put on the bag. Cause I'm like, I don't really know what this tastes like.
I remember a competition in Colorado and the gal says, the flavor note in this was Madagascar chocolate. And now that's an interesting note because I've never had Madagascar chocolate, but I loved her.
You can make these super specific
flavor
notes. You can say this is raw mineral sugar, but if that can either really go in your favor and the judge is like, that's it.
Yeah.
But if they don't know what that is, they're like, nope.
Yeah.
So you can.
That's funny.
You have to find that balance of being specific but a little bit more broader. You're like, all right, do I say it's Fuji apple, or do I just say, oh, red apple, or white grape versus grape, or mandarin orange versus orange? I don't know. it's
You could really confuse them with a tangerine because it's pretty close to the same thing.
they're like, when's the last time I had a tangerine?
Right?
You know, like,
Yeah, because they don't know that. Okay, another question. Any fun Origin trip stories you'd like to, have you been to Origin?
I've never been to Origin.
No.
I've had like 6 or 7 trips lined up, and then being in the restaurant world, things change a lot, and there's sometimes where I'm like, I can't leave right now.
Yeah, because I hear pros and cons, but a lot of the people that develop, a lot of these guys, these roasters that develop these personal relationships with their growers and they keep building it, it's kind of cool.
I've worked with some of the same producers over the last few years, and when I first started buying coffee, I was definitely buying from some importers, and now I'm getting stuff shipped directly from DHL, from the farms and stuff. I'm still working with some importers, but I'm seeing more, or I think everybody's seeing more of the producers and farmers getting into doing their own exporting, importing, shipping in small quantities, which I'm preferring. I'm getting some really nice Panama coffees for the Golden Bean coming up. And just DHL straight to the door. And,
Beautiful. Beautiful.
But, then they're getting all the money, and it's not, they're not paying all these logistical fees to get something shipped and middlemen and everything. And it's like, cool, like let's just cut the chase. I need this coffee. I'm going to pay you directly. And
that's cool because I can see that. How's it been since competing in the champs and coming in third?
It's been
Your
great.
mom was pretty happy.
She's always been my biggest supporter.
She's awesome. It was really a pleasure meeting her today.
She's a sweetheart. And, I was originally in college, I was a biology major, and I was planning on going to med school. I wanted to be an anesthesiologist. The band I was in at the time, we started touring a little bit, and then I was like, I'm not going to med school. And she was like, what do you mean? No.
Right.
And you went from like almost like, oh, I don't have to worry about you. Now I have to worry about you again. And as I got into that, she's like, I don't know if you're gonna be able to support yourself, and like I was like, that was when she said that, I was like, I'm gonna make it a goal to figure out how to make a living doing this. Yeah. And then I got to that point, and she's like, I can't control, like, I just want to see you happy, and I was happy doing what I was doing. And then now she knows my work ethic and the time I will completely become obsessed with something, and I want to figure it out as quickly as possible. So that's always been how I applied myself, even if it's some kind of career change. And then when I got into coffee, she's like, here we go again.
Yeah. And now she knows you're doing everything.
And then now she knows, I'm putting myself out there, and she's like, she's hit me up. Did you get the results yet? Did you get the result? I'm like, and she wants to know. And
gotta love that.
And like, I bring them coffees, and my dad collects a little bit of wine. So I remember and he grows a bunch of tomatoes. My whole life he's growing tomatoes, and like right now it's like peak tomato season. Yeah, they just had the big Creole Tomato Festival. But
awesome,
just being in the garden growing up, he's like, we're gonna go pick the tomatoes, and like just smelling the tomato and the plants, fresh tomato. So fast forward a few years, I get a Kenyan coffee that, if you brew it a certain way, it tastes like tomato soup.
Amazing.
And I brought that to him. I pulled him a shot of espresso, and I brought it over to him, and I was like, I want you to take this coffee. It tastes like tomatoes. And he's like, what are you trying to, he's confused, and he drinks, he's like, that tastes like tomato,
That's really
so
cool.
It's just kind of like this nostalgic. Some people are like, I don't want this coffee that tastes like tomato. But for me, I was like, oh, this is cool. This is like, it's this, sensory experience tied to like nostalgia.
Yeah,
for me,
the first thing you think
being
of
a kid picking tomatoes,
sharing it with Pop. I think that's awesome.
And just like making little connections like that has been fun. It's been fun to like bring my parents, and my mom has a little Breville barista machine, and she's like, I'm out of beans. She's
you
like,
gotta
gonna put an order in, and she's got like her little tamping mat and everything. Like she like went crazy on Amazon, and she's like, oh, I got this, and this. I'm like,
I get that.
Yeah.
It's hard not to. Once you start getting into, even in brewing, when you're extracting, flavors and notes, and you just go, wow, because knowing what you did that was a little bit different, trying something that's a little bit, and you don't have a lot of control in the brewing, not as much as in the roasting, right, on how the overall taste is going to come, but it's and in grinding, everything.
Sometimes I feel like I'm in this weird purgatory, being like a roaster who provides company or coffee for Bearcat, and then also working bar with the coffee I roast.
Yeah.
And I'm constantly going back and forth. I'm like, was it the roast, or is it
right.
how I'm extracting it, or is it? And it's this push pull. And I think with anything you do in coffee, whether it's brewing or roasting, you have so many variables. You know, when I was starting the roast, I was like, I don't know if I should adjust the gas or the airflow or the batch size. Like, where do you start? And it's, how do you make all these variables a control and just manipulate one thing? Okay, I'm going to roast the batch with the same heat, but started with different low or medium or high airflow all the way through, and taste that, and then say, okay, I know what that does. And then go back and be like, all right, I'm going to leave it on one airflow setting, and I'm going to change the gas. I'm going to soak it, or I'm going to charge it with really high heat.
It's trial and error and try.
It's just trial and error. And I think that's where going back on, I don't think I'll ever stop learning. So it's never going to be stale to me. Yeah. And I've talked to people who are very extroverted, and would say I'm extremely introverted, but running around the restaurant and knowing the regulars and the stat, it's like it makes you become extroverted. But I know a lot of extroverted people who are not interested in being introverted whatsoever. And, they want to be behind the bar, making drinks all day. And they're like, you like roasting? I was like, I love it. They're like, I would rather watch paint dry on the wall.
Yeah.
That's not for me. And I'm like, I like the quiet time, headphones on. You're just kind of in this Zen state. And,
I get it. I don't roast, but I get that. I drive. And there's most of the time I'm behind the wheel going to see another roaster. There's nothing I'd rather be doing.
Yeah, on to the next.
Yeah, it's on to the next. One more thing. Is there anything else you'd like to include? Because this has been awesome, been informative, and for an introvert, it was really great pulling this stuff out of you.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was going to say, can you ask him on camera? Can you explain a little bit more about Alinea and how you created that coffee and then brought it into Boss Cat?
Yes. So I kind of getting into the pandemic of okay, I'm a little bit more comfortable selling my coffee and cupping the coffee I was roasting up against the previous coffee company we were carrying. I was like, all right, because my business partner was like, do you want to provide the coffee? And I was like, no, not yet. Not, it's getting there. And then once I did kind of take that on and start providing coffee, everything just kind of snowballed. And I haven't really looked back since. And it is crazy, running 2 locations and then having to roast sometimes.
Do you have just a group of coffee fans that come in primarily to get your coffee?
I do. And now that we have the bakery down the street, our pastry chef and myself we wanted to have, this is all about the whole experience here at Bearcat, but we wanted to emphasize the pastry baking program and the coffee a little bit more. So here it's, I source different coffees for here and for the bakery and for Alinea itself. I source some more higher end, lighter, brighter coffees that do well that I sell a lot of online, but that doesn't necessarily translate to here, because here we're getting kind of it's a different mindset with the clientele here. And we used to work with Equator Coffees when we opened the Uptown location. And I think the cool part about working with them at that time was there was so many there. You would get their offer sheet every week, and it wasn't just 6 coffees. It was we have 25 coffees to pick from. So we were getting kind of some staples, and then that helped me figure out our demographic and what they wanted, because I was ordering different single origin coffees every single week.
You can see the results that we're getting.
And you get the feedback of oh, this is great, or you wouldn't hear anything. You're like, okay, well, I'm not going to get that coffee. So it really helped me take a lot of the guesswork out of okay, I know a lot of washed Central American coffees, light medium to medium roast do really well here. And we get a lot of people coming in. I want to give them a better coffee experience than their hotel, or you can't give them something too out of the ordinary. You're asking somebody to stand on the side of a pool, and
you got to
look,
walk them through that.
Don't feel the water. I need you to just jump in, and it's giving them something a little bit more in their comfort zone, where it's still a very great coffee. it's way better than what they're expecting, but it's kind of like they're putting their toe in the water and feeling it. They're like, okay, well, this water feels good. Like they know a little bit. And here we get a lot of people putting a lot of, milk and sugar. We have some sweeter syrups for some of the lattes, but we give people that option. And I have a lot of people that come in and they're like, I want to drink what you drink. So sometimes I'll bust out like the Clever Dripper. I'll make them a little pour over, even though that's not something we necessarily offer. And I'm like, oh, this is great. And then you see people make this transition from drinking the darkest roast and they start drinking a little bit lighter, and then they stop drinking it with milk. And then now have people coming in. They're like, oh, I want the lightest roast you have. Yeah. And you've seen this transition. And they kind of buy everything, but they get a little pour over setup. And I'm happy. Like, I love being that asset to them, or like being able to help people. Just kind of, they have this little like routine they do in the morning, and they send me videos of like, hey, this is me doing a pour over this morning on this thing you told me to order. And I even have like a little brewing Instagram page where I'm like, okay, cool. Like, I've made some brewing tutorial videos with some baseline recipes. I'm like, oh, you want to kind of experiment, try out some of these. And then you see some people they're full-blown coffee nerds.
Well, what's awesome about that is because I think that success turns when people, on your end, when you give people what they want to begin with.
Yeah.
And then bring them in, right? Instead of, no, we don't do that, right? Yeah. We don't do dark here. We don't, those people are going to leave.
Yeah.
But they will come in and they're going to start dropping off their cream, the other stuff that they put in their coffees, and start drinking it.
And I think coming back to what you were saying earlier about having a wide menu with a bunch of different things, it's like we want to have something for everyone. Yeah. If you want to eat something super, super heavy and fried, we have that. If you want a chia seed pudding, something that's easier, lighter, you're not going to want to take a nap right after. It's like, okay, cool, I got to go run around at a conference for 6 hours.
Will it give me more energy? I'll have one. No, I'm just kidding.
And we want to have, there's people that are like, oh, I want the sweetest drink you have. It's like, I'll make it for you. I'm not gonna,
absolutely.
Like, I want you coming back, and it's like, whatever you need.
I had a guy that I went into his place. He goes, your timing's perfect. He's up in the Sierra, California, Nevada. I said, what's up? He goes, well, come here and check this out. We go to his tray. He goes, what do you think? I said, what am I looking for? This is my first shot at dark. And he started roasting coffee in Portland. So he goes, I got to learn how to do this, because that's what people want to drink up here, up in the mountains, right? He goes, and I said, it's smart, because that's what's going to keep your lights on. Give them what they want. And now I was in his shop last year, or no, it was earlier this year in January. I went through his shop, and he's got a coffee shop now. And his patrons in there, I mean, I don't know what they were all drinking, but what I saw that they served, they've come into his world now, right? But it starts by not having the, no, this is how we do it, and this is how you're going to enjoy it, and you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, you can't just be like, take it or leave it. Like, this is what, there has to be a balance of,
But flexibility too. You got to be flexible, right?
You can't. Yeah, you got to be as inclusive as you can, and say, look, we'll find something like, people come in, they're like, I want the darkest thing you have. I'm like, look, I don't have a dark roast like that dark, but I got something like medium dark, like maybe I'll pull some coffee out of this.
Torch and darken this stuff.
It's like, cool. Like, I got something for you. It's not as going to be as dark, but and then you see, I'm like, oh well, this is good.
Good.
I remember being at the first Roasters Go retreat I went to. I think this was ultimately the catalyst for Alinea starting. So I remember I was just getting into roasting, and I was like, oh, Coffee Roasters Go retreat. I was like, I don't know about this. Like, the registration opened, and I was like, you know what? I was like, I don't know anyone going. I'm going to be by myself. It's outside of Atlanta. Like, it's close, but I was like, maybe next year.
Alinea or something like that.
Yeah. So the next day, I'm in the other Bearcat location, working the bar. And a guy comes in, he's got a Sweet Maria shirt on. And I was like, oh, you roast coffee? He's like, yeah. You should go to the Coffee Roasters Go retreat. And he just came in. He's like, I'm road tripping through here. Just stopped here. He's like, it turns out it's Matt Toomey.
Yeah.
From Little Dreamer Coffee.
Yeah, we just had it. Well, last year at Lucy, we were in there. Yeah. We went down to the Little Dreamer.
He's like, I'm helping station instruct. You need to go. And
He's right.
I didn't even hesitate. I left work that day and I booked it. That's when I got room with Mehmet.
Yeah.
Turns out, and it's just like I got hooked up with all the Balzic people. I started buying. That was the first coffee importer I worked with, and it's like everything from this one moment of this random person randomly stopping through to get breakfast and coffee.
You need to go to the retreat.
And I didn't even say, I was just like, yeah, I roast coffee too. He's like, you need to go to this. And I was like, this is a sign. And then all of this opened up. I wouldn't be here today without that random.
Well, and bringing up Mehmet's name, I mean, both you guys got a lot out of that, without question. I think the retreats are phenomenal. I really do, because it's you guys getting together and the coffee roasters, coffee people, suppliers, everything, just getting together and
it's nice because it's like Mondays here in New Orleans. Most coffee shops are closed, and you go to the few coffee shops that are open, and you see all the other coffee baristas, all your friends that normally you're on one side of they're working, they maybe can say, hey, they don't have too much time to talk to you, but these small moments where everyone's just like off the clock, and it's like, cool, I can breathe, and we can actually hang out and have a conversation. The Roasters Go retreats, the competitions, coffee, festivals and stuff. It's nice to see people completely hang up what they have going on back home, that maybe that's the 1 week out the year where they can get away, and meeting these people for like who they actually are. And you can see these people kind of like unbutton the top button a little bit and be like, okay, I can lay back a little bit and like have a good time.
Yeah.
I think it's in those moments where it's like cool. Like we see each other 1 week out of the year, but it's always a good time because we're both leaving the chaos behind.
Yeah, and you're there.
And you're
right
landlocked, especially at the Roasters Guild retreats. Like you were landlocked at a resort.
Yeah.
You took a bus an hour from the airport in with everyone else,
and you're surrounded by roasters, and you're surrounded by roasters from all areas, right? Yeah. I mean, from people who have been in the business for 30 years to people who are just in it for a couple of months.
And I've learned more. I've learned just as much from the best roasters in the country as I have. Like you have, people would be like, "Oh, can I come watch you roast?" And then they ask you a question. And you're like,
"Yeah,
you're not prepared for it." Yeah. And you're like, "Oh, I didn't even."
That's cool.
Think about it. There's so much that you're like, you have these blinders on sometimes, and it's like the most general person that's not as deep into it asks you this basic question, and it sparks a million things. But
so being teachable is important.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like you learn so much by teaching sometimes. You learn more from teaching than sitting and just listening sometimes. And
sometimes you learn more from honest criticism too, right? You just, maybe I ought to evaluate that because I like this person. They're not going to come in and just, you know what I mean?
But I've had, and I don't think everyone always wants to say this, but I've definitely had negative feedback learning how to roast. So people are like, yeah, it was all right, and like you're kind of like kicking you down. You're like, oh, but you need that humbling experience to be like, you can be the best roaster in the country 1 year and you can be dead like nothing is guaranteed year after year, and everyone is. I see people not place as well, and it definitely beats them up. But I think it's part of the like nothing's guaranteed.
Yeah, but I think that also can strengthen somebody as well.
Oh, it definitely it makes you a tougher, well-rounded individual.
Yeah.
You just have to say, hey, all I can do is the best I can do, and it's a dogfight.
But sometimes what seems to be the worst thing that could happen becomes the best thing that happens.
For sure.
Because that's what I'll speak for myself, and this isn't about me, but I'll learn more from mistakes than I will from, perfect, great, good job, But when I'm making a mistake, I don't want to repeat that again. What am I going to do to change that, right? But if I went down this way when I could have just done a little slight turn and I'd have done it a little bit differently, things would have turned out.
Yeah.
Question the mindset, question all that stuff.
I love when people can actually come visit me and see what I actually have going on, because I'm wearing a lot of different hats.
You got to see this menu, guys. I'm telling you, you have got to see this menu. It's going to be hard. It's the kind of restaurant you can come back for almost every night during the week and get something different that you're going to enjoy.
Yeah.
It's New Orleans at its best.
Yeah.
Good stuff, buddy.
Cool. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.